All right. Welcome, everybody. Thank you so much for joining our webinar today to talk about arguably one of the most important topics that we face as a talent community. And that's how to build a scalable hiring process that attracts a diverse group of engineering talent. And I think we can all agree that there has never been a larger gap between the supply and demand for good engineering talent. And that makes it even more important for organizations to cast a wider net to attract a more diverse candidate pipeline. So in this webinar today, we're going to share how to invest in building a TA program that focuses on diversity and what processes work best for scalable and inclusive hiring. Because let's be honest, the tech recruiting landscape is changing and the world needs more problem-solving ability, and it's the diversity of thought that's going to breed that type of innovation. So my name is Jeremy Schmidt. I am the Director of Global Talent here at Codility. For those of you that don't know, Codility is a platform that allows organizations to screen and hire talent in a fully remote workplace while building a repeatable and measurable hiring process that focuses on technical aptitude and really removes that unconscious bias from the hiring process, which, let's be honest, we all know is real and that it exists. Codility also helps you improve the volume and the quality and the diversity of your talent pool. It helps you identify key skills beyond just that applicant's resume. And it really helps foster stronger relationships between the talent side and the engineering stakeholders because you're providing stronger candidates, more diverse candidates, all with a really, really solid data-driven approach. But enough about us. I'll have other opportunities to throw in some shameless plugs about Codility as we go. But in the meantime, on the left-hand side of your screen, you'll see a tab that says Expo. So please feel free to click there if you'd love to speak with one of our team members after the session today and hear more about Codility and some of our features and functionalities. And with that said, I wanted to also give a quick shout out to our partners here at GEM, who were nice enough to sponsor the event today. If you have not checked out the GEM product, do yourself a favor and schedule a demo with their sales team. It is pretty awesome. And I know Caroline will give us some tips and tricks about their product today as well. So really excited to get started. We have an amazing panel to help us dissect this really important topic that we face today. And I want to give each of our panelists the opportunity to introduce themselves, tell us a little bit more about their organization. And most importantly, I would love to hear what diversity means to each of you before we get started. So who would like to dive in?
I can go ahead and go first. Oh. You first, Caroline.
Thanks, Chris. So I'm Caroline. Hello, everyone. I lead the people team at GEM, and I've been there for around 2.5 years now. And if you're new to GEM, we're a company that builds software for recruiting teams and recruiters. And we built a lot of tools to help automate a lot of your manual workflows. So things like sourcing and nurturing candidates, for example. And we also make it super easy for you to see recruiting analytics, letting you pull basically any stat that you'd want to see around what's happening in any part of your pipeline. This includes a ton of diversity analytics, which I'm really excited to chat a little bit more about today. And to answer, why is diversity important to me? You know, there's a lot of reasons, but when I think about the workplace, I think it's, greater innovation and creativity. It's happier and more productive employees. It's understanding your customer base better. There's a whole lot there. But largely, I think diversity helps companies thrive, both culturally, but also financially.
Agree 100%. Chris, did you want to dive in?
Sure. And I will also say that we are big fans of GEM as well. And we've had that implemented for over a couple of years and very successful with that. So my name is Chris Weber. I lead a global team of about 35 plus in EMEA and the Americas. We're focused at Unity Technologies on hiring for AI Operate Solutions, which is our largest business unit at Unity, as well as the G&A functions along with marketing. So with that, we are building a diverse workforce from the ground up, built on empathy, respect, and opportunity. In that, diversity in hiring URGs is a personal thing, right? I am a married LGBT leader with 2 children. So I know some of the challenges that are faced by folks from URGs. As well, we know at Unity that creators are the people that drive great outcomes in the world. And so with that, we also know that diverse creators add a spectrum to creation that would be lost otherwise. So it's a very important element, both to myself in hiring diverse, but also very much a focus at Unity for us.
That's amazing. Chris, I literally got goosebumps while you were talking. You said that so eloquently. It hit me right in the heart. So I think it's just so important. But I know we also have our team from Thoughtworks. If you all want to dive in and introduce yourselves.
Sure, I can go if you want. So hi all. I'm Cristina. I'm recruiter and team lead at Thoughtworks Spain. For those who don't know, Thoughtworks is a global consultancy company that integrates strategy, design, and software engineering to help our clients. We are really passionate about good practices and agile methodologies. And also answering why diversity is important to me. So as a working mom, I also face difficulties during my career. So I'm advocating to help women in their growth. So, and also as Caroline said, like diversity in a teams help you in a lot of ways.
Great.
Yeah, and hello, everyone. I'm Maria, and I'm part of Thoughtworks recruitment team as well. I'm working with Cristina at Madrid office, and well, I'm been working in Thoughtworks for almost 2 years now, and I'm very, very happy to be part of this company and also to this panel, because I consider that diversity is really important. It has always been, but now it's even more important. And with all the COVID crisis as well, it's even more important. And I think it's again, repeating myself, not only important to understand what's going on in your organization, but also to understand what's going on in other organizations and also in the market and share experience. And that's why I'm very happy to be here with you today.
Thank you, everyone. That was a great intro. So let's dive in. So the first question here, I want to point towards Caroline. Would love to get your thoughts to start. How do you go from creating a diversity recruiting strategy to actually implementing it and implementing it all the way down to the ground level? How do you start that? How do you get that buy-in?
Yeah, this is a really good question. And I think to start, this might sound obvious, but I think you need to figure out where your focus needs to lie, right? I think it's really important that the strategy you roll out has enough focus to it where you can get really tangible and know what you're really prioritizing. So I think my recommendation here would be to look at the current demographics of your company and take stock of where you're currently at to start. And I would also make sure to do this by level. Demographics, they might actually look, quite good as a whole, but when you start breaking them down and looking, maybe at your leadership team or executive team, do you see similar demographics across those teams as well? I think that's really important to take a look at. But once you've done that and you've taken stock at where you're at, you'll probably have a good idea of the areas that you want to focus in on.
Yeah.
And I really think it's important to set goals, right, on around those. And where do you want to increase representation, and what is the goal that you're all collectively working for there? And I think that this actually can be a really hard part of the process for people to figure out. And so I thought I'd share how I've thought about this in the past. And I typically look at 3 different things. So one is where the team is currently at. 2 is where the industry is currently at. And then the third is, how the specific demographic you're working to improve is reflected in the broader population at large. And doing this can help you understand like where you are, where you want to be, but also just help you set realistic goals, which I think is like a really important part of this, to stay realistic with yourself. And so like to put this into an example, let's say like my area of focus is improving gender diversity on engineering. And maybe I see internally that 15% of my software engineers identify as female. And I know also in tech that like roughly 20% of software engineers identify as female. And then in the US, roughly 50% of the population broadly identifies as female. My first goal might simply be increasing our numbers of female identifying engineers to be in line with what we see as in the rest of tech. And like, we know that's not a great benchmark, right? Like 20% isn't good, but it's like, it is a tangible goal that we can work towards. And then once we're getting closer to that goal, we can start updating the goal and that goalpost to reflect like our North Star goal of having gender representation show up similarly to what we see in the broader population, right? So yeah, I think setting realistic goals is really key, because sometimes there is a large gap between where you're starting and where you truly want to be. And that delta can feel unattainable without breaking it up into like small measurable chunks to go after. So once you have those goals, you can build a strategy to execute against them. And I think that there's like a ton of different ways to do this. I'm sure we'll get into the meat of a lot of that today. But one big focus I've always had is just increasing the diversity at the top of the funnel. So it's working with the team to figure out solutions and how to do that, whether that's, setting guidelines around outreach and sourcing and how you think about prioritizing diversity there, or bringing in tools like Codility, right? That can help you increase your top of funnel. I've always just thought about how to build thoughtful pipelines to make sure we always have a really, really diverse set of candidates that are interviewing with us.
Yeah, and I think too, when you have a great executive team that is honest with themselves to look in the mirror and find those areas of underutilization, to put the plans into place and foster that top-down approach so that everyone in the organization is aligned. I think that makes a huge impact towards putting that strategy into place. And I know, Christina, you've done a lot of strategic approach around implementation for this as well. Could you give us some of your thoughts?
Sure. So I'm very aligned with Caroline that you need to have goals to get the targets, but also I think there should be an alignment of the mindset of the company in order for diversity to be a KPI, not only for recruitment, but for the whole business. So this allow us to create company impact as well. And also understanding what is diversity for each country when working in a global company. So I can give you some example as well. Here at Thoughtworks, we develop different strategies depending on for example, this year we have focused our strategy in sourcing strategy for senior and lead women. And we have seen an increase in our pipeline when recruiting women. Also in Brazil, for example, we have a learning program about agile methodologies and good practices to reach out to people with less study opportunities. And I can give you another example, for example, in India, where we have a technical training program to women who have taken a career break in order to help them to come back. We have this program. So as Caroline said, depending in which part or in which time you are in your company, you have to focus your diversity strategy to go for one plan to another.
Yeah, it sounds like you guys have a very empathetic approach towards that, and that's just fantastic to hear. And that segues really well into my next question. So Chris, would love for you to jump in and talk about what are some of the biggest internal or external challenges in hiring engineers with a diverse background, and how are you addressing some of those challenges?
Yeah, so for sure, internally, right, is getting to Caroline's point, getting everybody on the same page. We're very fortunate to have a CEO and a leadership team that have a lot of empathy around recruiting for diverse employees, and also making it a spotlight as far as a priority for the company. That's very clear in all our town halls globally. For us internally, right, is cascading because we, are well over 4,000 employees heading to 5,000 with 40 plus global locations and 20 plus countries. It's taking that message, right, and synthesizing it and localizing it to different regions and making sure everybody's on the same page. As you all know, really the only thing that we can emphasize globally from a reporting perspective is women hires, right? So that's something that we spread far and wide and evangelize as an importance in our hiring. But localized to the United States, obviously ethnic URGs and beyond that into other URGs is of importance. And so we focus on that here. But beyond that is getting the hiring managers focused on hiring diverse. So it's one thing to have a tagline at your executive level, but what does that translate down? Some of the best things that I've seen in solving for getting a focus on diversity is doing a 2-week period where you don't post the role, even though it's active, and dedicate your time to developing a diverse slate of candidates. That's where Jim comes in. But really driving that top of funnel, to Caroline's point, of getting a diverse candidate slate going, and then training your managers. So I rolled out global training on inclusive interview and how to do it. And so that's important. And also training your hiring managers on understanding their own biases and how to avoid that in the interview process. And then, so internally, it's really focused on messaging and why it's important in training employees. Now, externally, right, and I think everybody faces this at the more senior professional levels, right? It's highly competitive. We're competing against behemoths like Facebook, Google, and Microsoft for a lot of our talent. So thinking about alternative ways that you can find that talent outside of your space or your, competitive mix, and reaching out to candidates that may be in other industries but have the same tech fundamentals is a great path that we find in competing with senior talent. Also, a great source of diversity for us is our university relations component to our recruiting organization. And that's actually led by Ed Palmer. But the focus there is, of course, developing relationships with universities. And UR hiring is a great solution for hiring a diverse workforce. And so that's been something that has been very beneficial to us. So externally, it's a matter of, where do you want to compete? Do you want to compete in your space, or do you want to look outside that space for the same tech skills? And then looking at early career in university hiring as a great way to increase your diverse hiring.
Yeah, I love that 2-week period idea to open up the job, but not post it externally while you try to build a little bit more of that diverse funnel using some of your tools. And I know, Maria, you've done a lot in this area as well. So, talk to us a little bit about some of the unique challenges that you've faced when building out your sourcing strategy to really drive more of that diverse pipeline into the top of the funnel.
Yeah, sure. So I would say that some of the main challenges were realizing that we needed to reorganize the way that we were used to do sourcing, and to dedicate some more time to focus on diverse sourcing, some more time. We needed also to dedicate some time to explore other markets that were unknown for us, as Chris were saying before, getting out of your comfort zone and looking for something new in some other places, and that was extra time dedicated for that. And also aligned to what Caroline said, related to having being able to have all the team agreeing on the same strategy, and also what Chris said, having everyone on the same page in order to move forward with the strategy and reach the goals.
Yeah. And I think that with a lot of the strategies we're putting into place, I would assume that everyone that signed up for the webinar today really wants to dive into how do you drive more of that diversity into the candidate pool in a more remote, environment that we have today. So my next question is, what are some innovative new things that you've come up with the last 12 to 18 months through COVID? What are some strategies that you would recommend to everybody?
Sorry, can you repeat the question?
Yeah, what are some innovative new ways or strategies that you've come up with to drive more of that diversity into your candidate pool?
Christina was leading a project there in order to source for candidates that were located out of Spain in our case. Yeah. And we were somehow free to contact them and ask them if they wanted to join the team in Spain. And also we have some budget for visa sponsorship. So in this case, we could look overseas in the market and having people working with us. And also in Spain, we launched a new remote policy that helped us a lot as well to contact people that we couldn't contact before. So that was also great news that came thanks to somehow the COVID situation.
And also, I can add something. So also the strategy will depend if you want to have results in a short, mid-term, or in a long-term time. So, for example, talking about short time, like focusing on sourcing these diverse talents, and talking for example, in long term, here at Thoughtworks as well, we have this graduate program where we invest a lot of resources in having the next generation of women in technology as well. Also, for example, we have identified during our hiring process that some women failing for technical skills during our hiring process. So we have built a workshop to train them in those skills, and they can repeat our hiring process. So also you have to analyze your hiring process and where you can improve.
Yeah. And I know, Chris, you've done some innovative things around some virtual career fairs. Could you tell us a little bit about those?
Sure. And they actually highlight the importance of GEM and Codility as well. So we have done pinpointed career fairs in different locations. For example, AI up in Vancouver. We did a URG-focused career fair and did specific invites to candidates and using GEM, of course, for outreach and inviting them to the event. From there, prior to the event, they actually had a discussion with a recruiter to introduce more about Unity and the role, and also invite them to take a challenge test on Codility, but prior to the career fair. And so in that process, not only were we inviting them to a specific career fair, this one was focused on women hires as well as ethnic URG. And in that process, we were able to figure out who we wanted to focus on afterwards, following the career fair, and then really using that fair event as a nexus for the next step in the process, and that's inviting them to speak with a panel, right? And so we found, especially in instances where we've had specific needs, multiple roles open, doing a career fair really focuses the hiring team It focuses them not only on hiring and doing it fast, but also with diverse candidates, and really using that as a funnel to drive a lot of hiring. The outcome from those different career fairs in my org, as well as in other orgs, has been very successful in driving URG hiring for different groups across Unity. I also, for hiring diverse, more senior candidates, I can't emphasize more the success of a drip campaign. So if you know that at a senior level, you're going to have this specific need frequently over the coming quarters or over the next year plus, it's also nice to have your leader of that organization start a relationship with a candidate. And we've used Jim as well in this scenario where we pinpointed highly qualified, diverse candidates and had the leader start the relationship with them via mechanism in Jim. And then recruitment continues to foster that relationship. And then, 2 or 6 months out, once that role becomes live, we have a relationship with cadre of candidates that we know are highly qualified as well as diverse.
Yeah. Yeah. And we just got a really interesting comment question that I'm going to pull in real quick. And it says, does anyone else compare the diversity at the top of the funnel to the diversity of the bottom of the funnel? So comparing the actual applicant pool to the hires. And if those numbers are roughly the same, can I conclude that we are not, or that we do not have a biased hiring issue? And so Caroline, would love your thoughts on that one.
Yeah, I love this question. It's something that I look at actually frequently in terms of like, what is the makeup of demographics like entering our process, and like what does that look like on the other end once we hire people? I would say you need to look at this in a few ways before you can like blatantly determine there's no bias. Also, I strongly believe that like every interview process has like, if it's done by people, there's going to be unconscious bias, and like the trick is trying to mitigate as much as you can, but like nothing is ever going to be bias free unless maybe Codility, right? Your software that like doesn't have feelings, but I would break this down to, look at this by like department and team, because it might be like, if you're looking at a company level, that might be great. Some teams might be seeing certain demographics hired, over the rate at which they're entering, and some teams might be seeing it lower. And so I actually think if you dig in like more specifically, and also within the process, like if you see large drop-offs with any groups between different stages, this is like a really good indicator. Like this is how I catch a lot of going into interview processes and like seeing like, what questions are you asking? Do you have standardized rubrics, right? If there are like weird things happening like that. So I would say you need to like dig and like look at this from a few different angles before you can like say, as a whole, our company is totally unbiased and we like have, demographics in, kind of demographics out type of thing.
Yeah, and it makes it even more important to have real-time pipeline optimization metrics that you can actually dive into and measure. And I think sometimes as talent teams, we may not be the best at inputting the information into the system real time, but if we're not doing that, it makes it impossible to look at these, to actually find the areas of inefficiencies and where we're doing things wrong. And that's actually a great segue into the next question, which Maria would love to get your thoughts here. And that is that so many developers in the process have amazing technical skills, but they don't necessarily know how to highlight that or write a good CV, especially when you're looking at a global pipeline where there could be some communication, gaps and barriers. So what's your approach to screening the resumes, and how do you make sure that you're not missing out on great talent, especially that diverse talent?
Yeah, very good question. So our approach here is to be as open-minded as possible. Avoid ticking the box, right? As some companies do automatically, and to read carefully all the information that is in the CV. So we, we detect not only technical things, but also some things that are aligned to our cultures, such as cultivation, continuous learning, passion about their job. And and also to double check our unconscious bias when we read these CVs, because it can happen, right? So we say that we are not responsible of our first thought, but we are responsible of our second thought and the action that we do towards that toward the thought, right? So and also even though it is, I consider that even though it is true that having a updated CV, well personalized and complete, will give more opportunities for candidates to differentiate themselves from the rest of the people. In the end, the CV, the resume is not anymore the point of inflection that will determine whether a candidate should be considered or not to be part of the process.
Yeah, I love that. And Christina, I know that you had some thoughts around sort of the awareness and attributes that you look for. Could you talk to us about some of those?
Yes, sir. So we have about this challenge about the conscious bias in our interviewers, and we need to prepare them in advance for it. So since you joined Thoughtworks in the first week, you are trained about unconscious bias and how this affects during the hiring process. So it is important to have in mind that you cannot eliminate unconscious bias because we are human, but you can create awareness about that. And also during a hiring bias, if you focus your interview on attributes and not focus in feelings or guts, you also can have a fair assessment about the skills of the candidates.
Yeah, I love that you do that the first week as well, because that really shows coming in the door like, hey, we are putting a conscious effort into building a unbiased process, and having that as part of your initial onboarding really sets a great example. So now we've sort of talked about the strategies, how to implement them, how to sort of build that pipeline. So now I would love to dive in to learn more about, what is your typical hiring process for a software engineer at your company, and what are some of the different stages, and do you use any type of technical assessments? Do you have any type of diverse interview panels that you introduce? So Chris, would love for you to kick that off.
Sure. So we at Unity, actually, as an effort to be more inclusive, right, have published our interview process online that we share with all our candidates. So there's no surprises, right? And so we go into on that blog post what we ask you, right? And we also put in like pro tips on how to do it, and what we look for. Our leadership skills like active listening, driving for alignment. And then we also go into our values, what's important to us, so every candidate knows prior to interviewing. Include them in on the fact of how we ask questions in our interview process. We use the behavioral interview process, and we give them the STAR methodology around that. And of course, review the stages to your question, right? So we have a recruiter phone screen, which usually is preceded by Gym outreach. And then a hiring manager review and screen. And then we invite them to take the Codility challenge if we're speaking about engineers or some of our data science folks. And then from there, we go into an on-site, and then finally reference checks and background checks. So, and then we have a detailed explanation as to what the candidate can expect from each of those. Because let's be honest, some URG candidates don't know what to expect in an interview process, right? And for a lot of people, regardless of their URG status, they may be more junior, may be intimidated by the interview process. So laying it clearly out for folks, I think really aids. I've actually used this as a tool for people that have been interviewing, friends of mine that have been interviewing at other companies. So I'm a big advocate of that. But at the top of the funnel, we use Gym. To assess our engineers, we use Codility.
Yeah. So you're really setting the table and publicizing what the process is going to be so that everybody can prepare, put their best foot forward through the process? And do you get good feedback at the end from candidates that will tell you like, hey, even though I may not have gotten this role, understanding the process and being walked through, I had a great experience, interviewing with the organization?
Yeah, so candidate experience is of utmost importance, and we recently integrated Talent Hub to our process, and that gives us a clear line of vision because the candidate is pulsed during the process, and after the process, and after disposition. And so that gives us a lot of rich data on where we're doing well and where we need to improve. And so we do use that as a constant iteration to drive towards excellence in our talent attraction organization. So that's vital to us, yes.
Yeah, that's great. One of the things that we're kicking off here at Codility that we've gotten some real positive feedback on recently is when we're talking with candidates about our process in a very similar way and sort of defining that for them up front, we're making a conscious effort to really talk about some of our employee resource groups that we have here. So we have 4 different groups around LGBTQ+. We have a parents group, people of color, and women of tech. And what we've been sort of offering the candidates is, choose your interview path, right? Is there a certain area or someone that you'd like to talk to in an informal way off the record, just to really understand what it's like to work at Codility and why we're trying to practice what we preach when we say that we are a safe and inclusive environment where everybody can feel comfortable to be themselves and produce their best work. And, we're not just trying to talk the talk, but walk the walk and give candidates the opportunity to sort of pick and choose some areas where they would like to learn more about us. And we've had some really good, overwhelming feedback from that thus far. So
that level of transparency is so valuable to the candidate for sure.
Yeah. And Maria, could you tell us a little bit about your hiring process for engineering at Thoughtworks?
Yeah, sure. So at Thoughtworks, we have basically 3 different stages. The first stage will be phone screen, the same as Chris have at their company, with a recruiter so that we can understand the previous experience and motivations. And of course, like presenting as well Thoughtworks to people who may know it. Then, of course, if there's an alignment, we invite them to for a pair programming interview. It's like a live coding session where the collaboration and technical skills are assessed. And it's also a great opportunity for all professionals to understand how a typical work day like at Thoughtworks. And I like what Chris said regarding preparation materials. I think also that's very important. And we also send this preparation material for candidates to understand what to expect and for them to be at a safe environment. And we also send these preparation materials for the interviewers so that they also understand and are empathic with the people that is doing the interview. And the last phase would be a remote office interview day, which is a phase with different chats with different people in the company, not necessarily technical profiles, so the person can understand the culture and diversity and different profiles that work here. And and that will be it.
That's great. So it sounds like we have a lot of similarities when it comes to trying to allow candidates to put their best foot forward and understand the process of what they're going to go into, and then providing them, great feedback as they're going through the process, which I think is key to any organization to really differentiate themselves, especially as we're working in a more global scale and trying to cast a wider net for more diverse talent. Which brings me to the next question here. And when I initially read it, I knew that I'd have to point this one towards Caroline. So I'm going to put the ball on the tee here for you and let you knock it out of the park. But could you tell us a little bit about some of the technologies or platforms or products that may help with your diversity recruiting efforts?
Yeah, more than happy to. Obviously, GEM is on this list. and I could go on, but I do have others on this list that I'll talk about too. But GEM it's really about the analytics for me, right? So I can pull really any analytic I want around diversity in my funnel, and that's incredibly useful, obviously, when looking for bias and like who's entering our process and debugging our pipelines. So yeah, some things that I look for are like how different teams are progressing on their diversity goals. Like, what do their funnels look like? What does their outreach look like? Are we seeing different response rates depending on like different demographics that we're reaching out to is a really interesting one that I look for. Are certain people passing through our interviews at higher or lower rates than others? There's a lot there. So I use GEM pretty heavily. I have to give Codility a shout out though. It's been pretty instrumental with helping with diversity as well. I talked about this, but it eliminates the unconscious bias that humans bring with them in the process, which is a really valuable tool to have. And it, because you're not using engineering hours for these interviews, it really lets us go broad and really capture a lot of different profiles from all different kinds of backgrounds to really like add that diversity into our funnels without having to put that weight on the engineers to do like a ton of interviews. So that's been really amazing. And then I actually have to give LinkedIn Talent Maps a shout out here. I find this really useful in like understanding just what overall talent pools look like. And then when I apply my knowledge of like what representation might look like for any one demographic that we really want to focus on against that talent pool, I can get a good idea of like what that might look like. And then I can kind of have a filter of like, should I broaden this criteria? Should we like look at this in other ways? But it's a really good tool to have conversations with hiring managers around setting expectations with diversity in, the profiles they're asking for. And then it also helps me double check my outreach in GEM with like, do the outreach I have and the demographics when I look how that's broken down, does that align with what I think the talent pool looks like? Because it really should. So that's a really helpful one too.
Yeah. And I'm going to go off script here real quick as we got a great question in the comments that I think is very applicable here. And that is, how do you overcome the potential bias that candidates may have towards, coding challenges or paired programming assessments? And Christina, would love to get your thoughts on that one.
So I really agree that having these code challenge or assessment sent home is going to avoid to have a diverse pipeline. So in my opinion, I will not have this assessment set because it really influences you to have a diverse pipeline. So here at Thoughtworks, for example, the first step to do a pair programming interview, but you do with the interviewer and you meet how we work here at Thoughtworks. So, and also to have feedback from the candidate and to change your hiring process and to make it more inclusive, you need to have feedback from the candidate. So if you don't have this candidate talking to you and knowing to you, you are not going to have this feedback and you cannot make an inclusive hiring process. So in my opinion, I will avoid to send a code challenge or any assessment.
Yeah, and I think when you're looking at a live paired programming session, it's really key to let the candidates know too that this is a great opportunity to understand their thought process and what they bring to the table and what type of questions can they ask of the engineering team. And a lot of the times with programming, there's not a right or wrong answer, but it's how do you go down that path to get to a solution and what type of critical problem solving skills do you have? And so I think in the live sections, when people start to get stressed or maybe they don't want to participate in it, that's the direction I go, that, hey, this is your great opportunity as well to talk with some of our leads to see what it would look like a day in the life of the programmer. And again, it's not just about getting the solution necessarily right, but how do you interact with the team and what type of questions do you ask? And in a day and age when you can just go to Google and find most of the answers, right, from a programmer's perspective, right, it's more important with the engagement of the team. So I think a lot of the times I'll lead with that to try to ease people's tensions. All right, so to jump into the next question here, which I think keeps us moving in the right direction, how do you measure the effectiveness of your recruiting for diversity? So I know we've talked a little bit about some KPIs and benchmarks and even pipeline, optimization. But Caroline, I would like you to talk a little bit maybe about debugging that pipeline and maybe some healthy conversion metrics that GEM sees across, all of their clients that they work with.
Yeah, totally. And I think it's probably obvious, but I rely pretty heavily on data to measure like a lot of the effectiveness around our recruiting efforts, but also our diversity recruiting efforts. So I have a few, and I've talked through some of these, but I can expand. But one thing I look at is reply rates broken down by different demographics. And what you want to see is like equal responses, right? And if you're not, there's like good follow-ups here. It's like, what does your messaging look like? What are you conveying in the outreach? What does your talent branding say about your company? What kind of candidates is that attracting, right? There's good tangible stuff kind of to follow up with there. Pass-through rates, again, same thing. You want to see these equal between your demographics. So I break this down by gender and race and ethnicity. And I look for at each stage of the recruiting funnel that people are progressing at the same rate. And I love to break this down by team and sometimes hiring manager, because that's when you can really take the actionable items of like, is there like a strong drop off somewhere? And that's where you can jump in and see. And like, usually like someone might not have like as structured of a process. And it's like, oh, so maybe you're not asking everyone like the same exact question, or like you don't have a rubric here. And so you can, help implement some of the things that should help with these numbers and help with reducing that bias, with pairing this with like probably, some regular cadence of unconscious bias training for everyone who's interviewing. But that's really helpful. And then I also think checking dropout rates is really healthy. So looking at who's dropping out of your process and looking again at that by demographic. Are you seeing certain folks dropping out more than others? Are they dropping out at certain parts of the process, right? And this like leads to questions of like, what signals or messages might you be sending in your interview process? What does the diversity of like your interview panel look like, right? That could be like I think a big predictor here. And then if there's like one specific stage that you see a lot of dropout, it's like very easy to dig into that and be like, well, what's going on here? We have like a lot of candidates dropping out after like our first phone interview, right? So I think those are what I look at basically to measure effectiveness. And like the gist of it is that like you want like different demographics progressing through your funnel, replying, like doing all these things at like similar rates is what I'd say is very healthy.
Yeah. And Maria, I would love for you to dive in, talk about some of the key data points that you track around your pipeline optimization for diversity metrics.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, sure. We are, I think, totally aligned with what Caroline said regarding like making the analysis of each of the stages to understand what's going on, looking for the rejection reasons, if candidates are rejecting us, if it's us rejecting them, why. Also, what we do is to, we think that it is very important to understand that what is diversity for each of the regions globally, because it can happen that it's not the same. So some countries and some regions are allowed to ask for some things like race or disabilities. For example, at Spain, we are only allowed to ask for gender in this case. So what we do, for example, in terms of tracking the funnels, we track the recruitment funnel without the efforts in diversity compared to the recruitment funnel with these efforts, and understand how is the behavior of this funnel. We also like to understand how many male candidates we need to contact in order to have just one phone screen with them, compared to how many women we need to contact to have one phone screen with them. It is important to say that we measure this on aggregated level and not individually. We think also this is important to for keeping confidential everything. And also I would like to mention that this kind of analysis allow us to create specific action plans to improve the diversity. For example, in Spain, we recently launched an initiative called Programa Tu Futuro. Is for women in Spain, and it is about different webinars that women thought workers give for free to all women that want to attend and learn what is to be a women technologist for career changes as well, and have the opportunity to be part of Thoughtworks as graduates.
Yeah, and that's actually a great segue into what's going to be my last question here, so that we have a little bit of time to jump into the comments. So Chris, would love your thoughts, and this is a pretty important question that I get quite often, is people that work at startups or smaller organizations that may not have the budget for a lot of the tools that we're discussing today, or the manpower to implement a lot of these solutions. So is focusing on recruiting for diversity even possible, for those smaller type of companies?
Right. I would say it's not only possible, but it is so very critical. I think everybody on this panel can attest to the fact who you have in the early stages of your startup. It sets the culture, and it sets who is referred into the organization to be hired, right? And so many times I have walked into earlier stage startups, and they have not been mindful of this. And it's a really difficult thing to actually turn around over the long term. If you're mindful and recruiting for diversity in your leadership, as well as your early hires, your founder stage, it's critical to your success over the long term. And listen, if you don't have the budget for Jim or a Codility, there are so many different ways to enable outreach. There's LinkedIn groups, right? There's sororities and fraternities at historical Black universities and colleges that you can do outreach to. There are professional organizations dedicated to URGs within a particular career occupation. The list goes on and on. Now it's a little bit, whereas Jim, it automates so much for us, right? You're going to have to put more effort into doing the outreach, but involve your founders and involve your current leadership in that process of developing relationships with these different organizations that are focused on URG. And again, university hiring is key in getting diverse hires. So focus in those areas early on, but it's so critical in the early stages of a company to hire for diversity.
Yeah. And Caroline, I think you had some thoughts on this one as well.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like Chris really summed that one up well. It's really important to focus on early stages, and it's definitely doable, right? I really do think it's all about being really thoughtful about how you're building pipeline. You're not letting pipeline happen to you. You're not going and building pipeline without any thoughts about diversity. You're being really strategic around what is the diversity that we want to have at this company. Where are we most underrepresented right now? Where is this industry underrepresented? We know where are we, do we know it's going to be really hard, to get the idea of where you start to focus. And then it's really just about being methodical in that, right? Let's make sure we're building pipelines that have some percentage of diversity, or that we're starting our searches with 100% focus, in these areas. So I think anyone can do it. You don't necessarily need budget. You just need the focus and the alignment to go after it.
Yeah, I agree 100%. And so I know we had a couple other questions that I'm going to skip here so that we can dive into some of the questions in the comments. So I saw a real interesting one come through a little bit earlier, and it says, I'm filling the top of the funnel with women software engineers, but they seem to have a relatively larger skill gap and don't necessarily pass the technical assessments. Should TA coach managers to lower the bar on technical competency for the sake of diversity? And feel free, anyone that would want to dive in, tackle that one.
So I will say that you should always be hiring the best person for the role, regardless. But I do think, Codility has some rich data sources at your avail, and hopefully whatever testing platform you're using to discover, is a test overall too difficult, and what is your drop-off rate and engagement. And so looking at those metrics, it may be that you, instead of lowering, you need to adjust the test, because like a lot of things, whether it's an engineer building an algorithm or an engineer building a test, there's infused bias, right? And so discovering that and working through what may be biased in your test that may be precluding women from passing at a higher rate.
Yeah. Anyone else want to?
Yeah, I completely agree with Chris. And also, I think it's not like lowering the bar. Also, maybe you have to think, okay, I'm being inclusive enough in my technical screen, because maybe that's the problem. We know that there are differences, and maybe one person is more open, another one person is closer, and you introvert, and you have to go deeper. So also we have to make this reflection about, okay, how is our hiring process? What are we doing bad in order to get this diversity? So also we have to look at ourselves and what we.
Yeah, and I think too, when you're looking at some of the technical assessments that organizations use, I think sometimes they have to be more geared towards that thought process and trying to understand, how someone thinks. I think a lot of the times they'll push forward, with an assessment that just has right or wrong answers. But you can always teach syntax, right? You can't necessarily teach math or thought process and some of those things. So I think if you can change the process maybe to be a little bit more subjective in some areas, that could really help as well. So another great question we got here is, what is the process to select interview panelists for the hiring process? Are screeners panelists also? And are panelists provided resumes for the applications? So how do you disrupt that confirmation bias? And anyone feel free to dive in.
Yeah, I think like Maria.
Go, Chris, if you want.
Go for it.
No, I'll defer to someone else. I'm not sure I understand the question completely. So
I think what they're trying to say is, as you're building out different interview panels, do you provide the panelists with different resumes for the applications? Do you try to remove that bias and have them going in with a, more of an open mindset? How do you select different interview panelists for the roles?
Right. So we're mindful of our panel selection. And so we try to infuse our spirit of diversity in our panel. So we're mindful around that. Secondly, we do train our managers on interviewing as well as avoiding bias. And again, we have inclusive interview training rolled out globally so people understand their role in the interview process, and to be mindful of both avoiding bias and being inclusive in both their language and the questions that they ask.
Yeah. Yeah. And are there any, is all of your training programs, Chris, homegrown?
Yes. So we have a great recruiting programs team that are owners of that. And we also, from a broader perspective, have an awesome learning and development organization that does a lot of this training. And so we grow it at the corporate level internally as well. We own some of that in recruitment via our recruitment programs team.
Yeah. Well, I want to thank everybody for your time today. Thank you for everyone that registered. If there were certain questions that were asked that weren't answered, I know all of us on the panel here are very active on LinkedIn, so please feel free to reach out and connect, and we can get some of those answers to you. Like I said before, if you have any questions about Codility's tool, feel free to stay around and click that Expo button and reach out to Caroline. If you have any questions about GEM, I'm sure she can point you in the right direction on that side. But again, thank you so much for logging in. I hope we were able to give you some actionable insight that you can take away and implement with your teams immediately. So thank you so much and have a fantastic day, everybody.
Thanks, guys. Bye-bye.
Thanks so much for organizing this.